Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start, we want to ask you to please be respectful and courteous to our panelists, and please put away any cell phones or laptops. Thank you. I want to welcome you to the SDSU Labor Rights Forum. My name is Fardosa, and my classmates and I are coming to you from our Engaged Citizenship and Social Responsibility class. Thanks to Jose Preciado, we are able to host this event. Our mission throughout this course has been to inform students about their rights as workers. And thanks to all the professors who opened their classrooms to us, we were able to reach over 4,000 students and collected 3,000 surveys. According to the surveys we collected, out of the 57% of students who are currently working, 40% of them reported a workplace violation. In response to the overwhelming need of student workers who are experiencing violations, we have collaborated with various local organizations who have graciously accepted our invitation to be here today. We have a panel of local experts on labor rights, and we are going to have a brief presentation from each panelist. As questions arise, please write them down on the index cards we have provided to you, and our classmates will be collecting them during the presentations. We understand that some of you are here for extra credit. We have sign-in sheets available with your professor's classroom name and section. Please sign in when the forum has concluded. Now I would like to introduce our first speaker and our professor, Dr. Jill Espenshade, who has been working on issues of immigration and labor for over 20 years. She has led a significant study on how restaurant workers are impacted by wage theft. Please help me welcome Dr. Espenshade to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Okay, so I wanted to start out by just defining wage theft for you. Wage theft is when your employer fails to pay you money that you have earned and you are legally owed. And we'll go into the various kinds of wage theft. I'm going to do this through an explanation of a report that we did with the Center on Policy Initiatives last summer based on research done by SDSU graduate students. We surveyed, in that project, we surveyed restaurant workers in the San Diego area. We talked to 337 restaurant workers and found that 77% of them had experienced some type of wage theft in the past year. And that 33% of them, a full third, had experienced wage theft often or always. So in terms of what kind of wage theft they were experiencing and you might be experiencing, and I should say that in the survey we did this semester of 3,000 students, the most common job that students on this campus have is in food services. Almost a third of students who are currently working were working in food services. So it's very pertinent to a lot of you. Sorry, I'm used to PowerPoint and not slides on the Google Docs. So the most common kind of wage theft we found was unpaid off-the-clock work. That's when you come to work early and maybe before you clock in, you roll the silverware, you set up the signs. It's not just in the restaurant industry, it could happen at your job. And you might clock out at the end of the day and then you have to finish a task or something spills and you have to clean up. If your employer is aware that you're working, you have to be paid for all time that you're working, whether or not it's on the clock. The second common kind of wage theft is reporting time. And this is something a lot of workers don't even know about. So if you show up to a scheduled shift, you've invested time, you've possibly invested money in transportation, maybe childcare, you've given up other opportunities, perhaps even to make money somewhere else. Under California law, your employer owes you 2 hours of wages at a minimum or half of your scheduled shift, whichever is more. So that is something you're entitled to. If you show up and after an hour they say, it's really slow today, you can go home, they still have to pay you half of your scheduled shift. Okay, the third type is overtime. This is one most people are familiar with. In California, after 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week, you get an overtime premium of 1.5 times your regular pay for for all hours worked. And that also applies to the 7th day of a work week. If you work 7 days in a row, the 7th day, even if you have less than 40 hours, say you're working 3 hours a day, on the 7th day, all hours should be paid time and a half. This next one is more particular to the restaurant industry. If you break something at work, or there's a cash shortage in the drawer, or there's a non-paying customer, those are expenses that are the responsibility of the employer. They are not the responsibility of the employee. And if that is deducted from your wages or tips, you are having money stolen from your pocket. And the last one is minimum wage. You probably all know that the minimum wage in California is $9 an hour. That's a less common violation, but if you're having that violation and 15 students reported that to us on campus in this latest survey, that means every hour of your pay, you're having money stolen from your pocket. Again, this is particular to the restaurant industry, but tips are also a way that employers steal wages. So management cannot take tips that are meant for workers. They can't reduce your regular pay because of tips, and they can't charge you credit card deductions on your tips. And we found that about 1 out of every 5 workers experienced one of these, and even more workers didn't know if they were experiencing it because tips are a form of income that's very obscure and hard to track, so it's very open to exploitation. The last area I want to talk about is rest breaks. You should be getting a 10-minute paid rest break for every 4 hours that you work. And if you're denied that rest break, the penalty is an hour worth of wages for each day that you're denied your rest breaks. We found that almost half of the restaurant workers we surveyed reported that their employer rarely or never provided the conditions for them to take breaks, and 42% were actually prevented from taking their breaks, which is a clear violation of the law. Finally, meal breaks. 2/3 of workers reported not always getting their meal breaks. Meal breaks after 5 hours, you're entitled to 30 minutes uninterrupted, unpaid meal break. That means the employer has to relinquish control of you. You can leave the premises. It's your own time. They're not allowed to call you back early. And if they do so, they again owe you an hour worth of wages. And we found that 2/3 had experienced it, over a quarter experienced it often or always, and worse yet, almost a quarter of employers made their workers in the survey falsely report that they had taken their break, their meal break. So they had to punch out, often at the end of the day on the computer, they had to punch that they had had their break, or they had to get their manager to come over and slide their card, and they didn't want to cause a problem with their manager, and their managers knew they weren't having their breaks. But they had to falsely report it, which means they're not getting their break, they're not being paid for the half hour they're working anyways, and they're creating a record that will protect the employer if the worker ever tries to claim those lost wages. And we're now going to move on to a lawyer from the Employee Rights Center and the director of the Employee Rights Center, who are going to tell you about how you can document your work and file complaints. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Good afternoon, evening. My name is Harold Calderon. I'm the director of the Employee Rights Center. And I won't take too much of your time other than to say that, the Employee Rights Center is one of the few or the only place in town where, regardless of your immigration status or your condition of work, you can come and report a wage violation. We're a nonprofit. There are other people and institutions that can help you with this, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But more than anything, we want to take the time to say that wage theft exists. It's actually pretty common, unfortunately, in many sectors of the industry in San Diego. And one of the things that we found that makes a difference is knowing how to document it. And we work closely with many attorneys in town. One of them that we have worked for a long time is with Rory Pendergast. And so he's here to tell you a little bit more about how he sees cases and how to best document them. So when you have a discussion with him, or when you come to the Employee Rights Center, you have as effective, as productive discussion as you can have. Rory?
Good afternoon. So my name is Roy Pendergast, and I've been working with the Lord since about '06 or so on these sort of issues, and for the past few years I've been out in private practice, and so I see these cases from a variety of aspects. Right, I've had a kind of a high-level, skilled computer programmer who was making $35 an hour in a class action lawsuit, down to right now I've got someone worth a few $1,000s, and for me the most important thing is that everybody remembers, if it's $300,000 or if it's $3, it's somebody stealing your money. And so the biggest thing that I like to remind people is that if I were to go around to each one of you, and I want to see this by hand, if I were to go around to each one of you and say, give me $1, give me $5, give me $10, are any of you going to be upset about that? Anybody, right? I would. I would, and what would you do if I did that? You'd speak out against that. And so the thing that I like to tell people is that, remember, it is stealing from you. So a few things right out of the gate is that the biggest thing that you can do is that the moment you think something's going on, you got to track your hours. And so what do I mean by that, right? Because what I hear all the time is this, well, we paid you everything that was on your schedule. I said, yeah, you know what, I don't disagree with you. You had it scheduled that this person was working 10 hours, and for those 10 hours, you paid them. What about the other 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever else it may be? So when I talk about tracking your time is, what is the time that you're actually working? As was said before, if your shift starts at 8 a.m., you show up 15 minutes early, and your supervisor says to you, okay, let's get going, start. You can clock in later, right? That's your time now. And so when you're tracking this, whether it's on a calendar, or I'm guessing there's probably an app where now's a good time for someone to track these sort of things with an app. You just hit it really quickly, so you can figure all of that stuff out. Oh, all right. So track that. And then the other thing that is hugely important is this: is that, are there other people who have seen this occur? Typically, what happens is that there's a few of you working there, and that the same thing is happening to everybody. And so there's strength in numbers, and from a litigation perspective, right? For things I won't bore you with, but with attorney's fees and trying to prove this, and what's helpful when trying to settle these claims for me is I go out and I say to the person, okay, give me 3 names of people who saw it, give me your tracking, your pay stubs, everything that you have. And then I go out and I figure out what happened with you, and I go in and make calls and I verify it. And what I'll do is I'll put it down into some sort of quick declaration, which is just a statement. I talk to the person, your coworker. I say, this is what was going on. Do you think that's what was happening? Is there something different? You tell me. Write it up. Have them look at it for accuracy. They sign it. I submit all of that when I'm making any sort of demands, and that is hugely powerful, because it comes down to the employer can't try to push you around as a litigant, right? They can't try to push you around once you've spoken out against it. You have, as I'm sure we'll talk later, strength in numbers. So now you've been tracking your items. You've got all this stuff. You realize that what's going on is wrong, and you're not going to allow somebody to come up to you and demand that they take money from you. So the next kind of step that you want to do is keep track of. Typically what happens is you have to sign off on your weekly or biweekly pay stubs. Has anybody ever had to do that, whether it's by pen? And so sometimes I've seen some computer programs. Wells Fargo has a beautiful, beautiful computer program that requires you, before you're going to get paid, that you have to actually verify that it's okay. Read this stuff. Take a few minutes and then ponder, what does it mean? You're verifying under penalty of perjury that this is true and accurate as stated, that you're the one who's putting this information in. So you got to think, if it's not accurate, speak up. It can be scary, it can be intimidating, but the moment you speak up, you're protected. Now, I understand that isn't the reality for many of you. So what you have to do is keep track. You track that, right? So now, the next thing you've noticed something funny is going on. You're tracking your hours. You're keeping the names of your coworkers. You're keeping the names of the people who are forcing this upon you. So supervisors or other people who work on behalf of the employer who are impeding, who are discouraging, or prohibiting you from doing what you're supposed to do, right? Like take a break. You keep track of that. Then what you want to do is gather up all this information, and then you call somebody like the Employee Rights Center, or you call an attorney like me, and you set up an appointment. Typically, I see people after they've been terminated. right? I see people after they've been terminated, but I do have a few people that come during the pendency, and we can fight it, and we can do this. But these are the things that I asked in the beginning: names of people you work with. Did you keep track of your own hours? And I mean what you worked, right? What you worked, not what they said that you worked. And then what sort of documents do you have for this? So keep your pay stubs. Most of this stuff anymore is probably electronic. Drop it into a folder on your computer, and that kind of gets you prepped and set up for what it is. The biggest thing that I hear often as well that I want to leave you with is this: if for some reason, I'm not a big fan of big fancy words, right? But there's one word in it. So the moment that you can show that you have inaccurate pay stubs, meaning that the pay stubs that you get every day aren't saying exactly what happened, that's inaccurate, then you're able to approximate the hours you worked. I don't know what it is about the word that I love, but I love it. Approximate. What that means is that the law isn't saying that you need to know down to the second how many hours you worked and didn't get paid for, how many breaks you missed and should have gotten. What it says is you get approximated. So you get to look back and you get to say, you know, I may not know exactly what it is, but I think this is accurate. Because it's the employer's responsibility to keep the accurate time records. And as soon as they aren't, all we have to do is approximate. So I'll kind of leave it with that for now.
Thank you, and thanks so much, Rory. And I just want to close with, you know, sort of like a practical, practical sort of tip and a suggestion. First, check out our website. The Department of Labor has created many apps. Some of them are in various languages, and that does essentially what Rory was asking for. You know, you just turn on, you know, you put it down, it's free, and but even if you have several employments, it'll ask you what kind of employment, and it just says what time you started working. You actually started working. Did you take a break? Did you take a lunch? What time did you clock off, in and out, and then what time you ended? And that all gets sent into an Excel sheet that is mailed to your email of choice. So it helps you track it as easy as you can on your phone, that you can always carry with you, and it'll be safe because it's going to be in your email. So you won't even have to have the paperwork to look at. And the other thing I would have to say is that's my practical tip. But the other one that's a little harder is please keep asking about this. If you have questions, call us or call Rory. We find so many people that feel shocked when thousands of dollars have been stolen, and now it's too late. So, take your time, because this is a very important thing for a lot of workers that get robbed at work. And so we strongly recommend you that, you keep having this discussion. Thank you. So, I think you might have seen at the entrance, there is this sort of like card sort of document that was created from that study that Professor Pinchet did with CPI. And in here, you'll find information of the Employer Rights Center in the back, if you want to have calls. And I want to make maybe something clear. All our calls, all our visitations, all our questions are all free. And we know that we can't take on everybody that's here. We can't take on in all honesty, the thousands of calls that we get every year. But what we do is then we connect with Rory and others that we know that know this and can give follow-up on this. And so, please do stay engaged and do ask questions, because I think that's the road to have self-control at work and have more power at work. And so take one, please, when you go.
Thank you, Alon and Rory. Our next speaker is a representative from Raise Up San Diego, which is a community coalition fighting to raise the minimum wage and increase the number of sick days for all San Diegans. According to the surveys we collected, 69% of students make under $11.50 an hour. So many students will benefit from the Raise Up campaign initiative. Please help me welcome Isela Ramos, the organizing director of the Center on Policy Initiative, to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Like your classmate said, I'm Isela Ramos. I work at the Center on Policy Initiatives. I'm the organizing director there. I just wanted to briefly tell you about the Raise Up San Diego and the Earn 6 Days and Minimum Wage campaign and what's happening right now in San Diego. So, how many of you have gone to work while you kind of were feeling a little under the weather, or you actually were a little sick? Yes, a good number of it. 55% of people who go to work sick are Latinos. 74% of workers who go to work sick are people who work in personal care and service occupations. Also people who take care of the elderly go to work sick. And also one important fact, and I know that folks can see this here, 82% of employees working in food service have gone to work while they're sick, and that's consistent with professors' findings that, connected to a lot of people who are in this room who work in food services as well. So we found that 44% of San Diego's private workforce lacks access to earned sick days. That means that there's no guarantee that even if you work per hour, you're not able to accumulate any sick time. So, also, how many of you can afford your own apartment? Yeah, it's expensive, right? So, okay, so that kind of shows. So, our research shows that 3.3 full-time minimum wage workers are needed to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. So, what CPI did was, and researchers at CPI, was to try to identify what would it cost to live in San Diego. We called it a self-sufficiency standard. So this basically is a monthly budget for no-frills living without public or private assistance. You can see there for the size of the family, it's adjusted. It's also adjusted for different costs that one might have, like housing, food, transportation, what you would need per month, and then the approximated hourly that you would need. So right there, people can see for one adult to be able to afford to be self-sufficient in San Diego, it would cost, or you would be able, you would have to make $13 an hour. So that should have had some dead on it, but it didn't. So, so this slide actually shows that the interesting thing about what's happening right now is that the economy is improving, right? The red line is going up right now, but that blue line is people's wages. Those aren't going up, right? So people say, oh, well, the economy, it's really tough right now. I don't know what's going to happen about the minimum wage. And we show them this data that shows that GDP is actually going up, but wages are not going up at the same time. So, so I apologize, there's a couple of typos on there, but so what happened here in San Diego is that, like many cities across the country, the City of San Diego and City Council passed a sick day and minimum wage ordinance, which was subsequently vetoed by the mayor, and then the council overrode the mayor's veto, but interests within the country, big corporations, fought to try to ensure that that wouldn't be happening. So what's going to happen now is that on June 6th, voters are going to be able to vote on two things: whether to increase the City of San Diego minimum wage to $11.50, and also whether workers should be able to earn 5 paid sick days. So you might hear, how many people have heard these things when we're talking about the minimum wage? If the minimum wage goes up, will prices of things go up? Yes, no? Or people might think themselves, right? Like might have questions about raising the minimum wage. I don't think people who haven't gone to school should get a raise to $11.50. Isn't the election about $15 an hour? Or people might be taking advantage. So what will happen if the majority vote yes on election day? This means that over almost 300,000 people will have access to earned sick days. It means that almost 200,000 people in San Diego will have a wage increase. And it also means that because the people who get that wage increase spend that money, $260 million will be in the pockets of people in San Diego, but also to local businesses and stores. So who benefits? So here, I know a lot of people might have heard about the wage gap, the gender wage gap. So that would close the the wage gap by 22%. 1 in 3 women would get a raise. 53% of those getting a raise would be women. 40% of Latinos would receive a raise. 48% of all workers would receiving, sorry if that's confusing. 1 in 4 African Americans would receive a raise. 9,000 African Americans would receive an increase in pay. For API, nearly 1 in 4 will receive a raise. 23,000 API will receive an increase in pay. And veterans, 10,000 veterans will receive a boost in pay. So who is the Raise Up Coalition and what do they support? So Raise Up is a coalition of community, faith, research, environment, small businesses, labor groups united to improving the quality of lives of working people throughout San Diego. The Raise Up Coalition supports the ballot initiative increasing the minimum wage to $11.50 and guaranteeing 5 earned sick days. So how can you join the fight for working families? You can register to vote and vote in the June election, or participate in the political process in other ways. If you are not able to vote, you can still call voters, you can still talk to voters about how they should vote. Also, you can volunteer with the Raise Up campaign. There's a sign-in sheet on the clipboard right here as you entered. You can attend rallies and forums that Raise Up will be hosting. There's also if people are interested in doing this to learning more as a career option, there is a Students for Economic Justice summer internship program, and there's some flyers on the table to let people know a little bit more about what it would feel like to do this kind of work. And how you can stay in touch with CPI. There you can go to CPI on Facebook, to our Twitter, to YouTube, and there's my contact information, and there is information on our website. So that's it.
Thank you.
Just as a reminder to everybody, if you have questions for the previous speakers, you can write them down on the note cards and our classmates will collect them. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Isela. Unions are an important aspect of protecting and defending the rights of workers in America. The disintegration of unions in the workplace has contributed to the rise of such workplace violations. Please help me welcome our next speaker, Richard Barrera, the Secretary-Treasurer of the San Diego and Imperial Counties Labor Council.
Thank you, and thank you to the class for organizing this. This is fantastic. This is an amazing turnout. Let me talk just a little bit about the basics of who we are as the Labor Council and who we represent. So the numbers are that we represent about 135 unions in San Diego and Imperial counties, which together represent about 200,000 working people. And the members of the Labor Council run from teachers and nurses and social service providers, home care providers in the public sector. And in the private sector, we represent janitors, grocery store workers, construction workers. So you kind of run the gamut of working people here in San Diego and Imperial counties who are members of unions and make up the Labor Council. But I wanted to ask the folks here, who here is either currently a member of a union or has worked in a job where you're a member of the union before? A few. Not a lot, Jose, right? So, and unfortunately, that reflects a reality today that's very different from the reality that existed a few generations ago. What do people think of when they think of unions? What ideas, what terms come to mind? Does anybody have thoughts? Or what is a union? Feel free to speak. Working in unity, yeah. A couple of other thoughts about what a union is. Protection comes to mind, yeah. The definition of a union, there's a legal, technical definition of what a union is, but really at its most basic, a union is a group of working people who come together to fight for economic justice in our own workplaces and in our communities. It's really nothing more or nothing less than that. That's what unions have been for over 100 years in our country. That's what unions are today. Working people deciding that by coming together, we have the ability to make change in ways that we don't have if we try to act individually. Let me ask another question. How many people here believe that if you went to your boss tomorrow and said, you know what, I don't think I'm making enough money for what I'm contributing here to this to the organization, I think I should get a raise? What do you think the reaction would be if you went to your boss individually and said, it's time for me to get a raise? You think a lot of you would be successful in that conversation? What if you went to your boss and said, you know what, I noticed, what we've been talking about here today, I noticed that I'm not getting paid for the hours that I've actually worked, and I think you owe me some money because I think you've ripped me off. What do you think the reaction to that is going to be? You're fired, right? What do you think if you went to your boss and said, you know what, I don't have an ability when I'm sick to actually take a day off, and that means that I've got to come to work sick, and by the way, I might work here in a restaurant, and it's not safe for our customers, for me to come to work sick. What do you think would happen? Do you think the boss would say, you're so right, take the day off, you're sick? Now let me ask the question a different way. So let's say that there are 100 people in your workplace, 100 workers. And rather than you individually coming and saying it's time for a raise, or it's time to make sure that we're protected from wage theft, or we need sick days here in the workplace, what if 10 of you came together and had that conversation with your boss? What do you think would happen? Maybe a little bit more. The boss would at least have to kind of look around and see, is anybody looking, right? Before I tell the 10 of you you're fired. What if 50 of you came? What if 90 of you came? What if everybody in your workplace together came to your boss and said, it's time for a raise? And what if your boss said, forget it, I don't need any of you? What do you think the reaction at that point would be? What do you think you could do if all of you, or if most of you in a workplace came together? What kind of power do you think you would have? What actions could you take if the boss is refusing to honor your demands? What do you think you could do? You could protest. There's a word that we think of that is less and less common today, but the word is strike, right? If 100 of us, if everybody in this workplace came together and said it's time for a raise and the boss refuses to talk to us, the action that we could take together is we could say, then we're shutting this place down. Then there's nobody to serve the customers. There's nobody to do the work that we're getting paid to do in this organization. And the truth of it is that with all of the formal aspects of organizing a union and bargaining for collective bargaining agreements, the power that workers have always had in this country has come when workers have been willing to come together in large numbers to confront their employer and to threaten the ability of the employer to stay in business. Now, if you look back over the course of the last 100 years, when workers took that action, sometimes they've been met at gunpoint, sometimes they've faced people coming and abusing them physically, sometimes they've faced the employer trying to bring in a whole different group of workers to keep the workplace in operation while workers were striking. The point is, it's always taken courage And it's always taken immense commitment on the part of working people to come together and exercise their power. But when workers have done that, when workers have come together and exercised their power, they have dramatically changed not only their own workplaces, but their society. We don't have the problems with child labor that we had 100 years ago in this country because workers came together and stood up. We don't have situations where workers are working literally 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, to the point that they work themselves to death in the way that we did 100 years ago because workers stood up. However, we have significant problems today. Working families are facing significant issues. You know, we heard a few of them here. Nobody raised their hand when they say who here can afford, you know, an apartment on their own. Working people are facing actually similar issues today that they were facing 100 years ago. And the answer 100 years ago and over the course of the first 50 years of the last century is that workers came together and more and more and more workers formed strong unions and changed their workplaces and changed the economy. So that by the mid-1960s, about a third of all workers in the country belonged to unions, about a third. And during that time period, 50s, 60s, into the early 70s, what we saw was that the economy was growing faster than it had ever grown in history of the country. You hear some of the scare tactics that you hear employers use. Well, if we raise the minimum wage, everybody's going to lose their job. Well, actually, the economy was the strongest it had ever been at the point that workers, that the highest percentage of workers belonging to unions existed. But the interesting thing about the economy was it was growing faster than it ever had been, but people in the top 20% and people in the bottom 20% and everybody in between were growing at the same pace. Today, does anybody have an idea of what the percentage of workers in this country that belong to a union? So it was about a third in the mid-1960s. What is it today? Was that? 80%. Think the other way. 15. Today, that percentage has come down to about 11% overall. And in the private sector, only about 6% of all workers in the private sector in this country belong to a union. And something has happened over that time period. So as we saw the peak of a third of all workers in the mid-1960s belonging to unions, we saw the economy growing stronger than it ever had and people growing together. Since that period of time when the percentage of workers belonging to unions has come down to its current 11%, 6% in the private sector, we've seen the economy continue to grow. However, we've seen all of the growth in the economy go to people in the top tenth of 1% in this country. So all of the growth has gone to people at the very, very top. And what's happened to all the rest of us? We actually work harder than we ever have. Most families have at least 2 adults working often more than one full-time job. And yet the numbers that CPI has produced show here in San Diego, 4 out of 10 people live in households that don't earn enough to pay the basic bills. So 4 out of 10 of us can't pay the rent, can't provide enough food to feed our families, can't pay for the basics, the gas that we need to get to work. And yet, people in the top, not just 1%, but 1/10 of 1%, have seen more wealth than they've ever seen in the history of this country. It's no coincidence that as the power of working people belonging to unions has come down, the struggles that working families have increased, and the economic and political power of people at the very top has gone to levels that we haven't seen before. So what do we need to do about that? What does this generation of workers need to do about that? 100 years ago, workers said, I understand the risk it takes to form a union and to take real action and to exercise our power. We understand the risk that puts us at. Today, we have workers that are also taking enormous risk. We've got janitors that are coming together in ways that we saw 100 years ago and standing up and forming strong unions and confronting their employers. And we see employers calling immigration and getting people deported. We see taxi workers, and Jill has done so much work with our taxi workers, immigrants largely, to this country that are coming together, again, without yet a formal union structure, but still coming together and a few years ago striking and saying, we're going to shut this industry down until we do something that's just for ourselves and for our families. And at enormous risk, those taxi workers are making real progress. So I think what we're seeing today is actually the rebirth of a labor movement in this country. But it's an understanding that in a situation where people at the top control so much power, not just wealth, but the political power that comes with that, our ability to make change fundamentally has to come from standing together, confronting our employers, and fighting for economic justice in our own workplaces and in our own communities. We've got to assert our legal rights. We've got to fight for political reform. But all of that comes from the simple act of working people coming together and standing up for themselves and for each other. And when we start to see that, there was an interesting piece of research that was done recently that showed the likelihood of people moving over the course of their lifetimes, moving out of poverty and into the middle class, is significantly increased if you live in a community where a higher percentage of people belong to unions. So think about that for a second. If I, as an individual, am in poverty, and over the course of my lifetime, I want to escape poverty and get to a point that I can support my family, I have a much higher likelihood of doing that if I live in a community where we have strong unions. And so when the taxi workers or the janitors or the home care workers or construction workers fight for justice in their own workplaces, we're fighting for justice for our entire community. We're building power in the way that we built power over the course of the last century and got to a point where we could grow together and people could actually pay their bills. So the job of the labor movement is first to support working people to come together, stand up for themselves in their own workplaces, but then collectively to come together and work to build economic justice throughout our community for all working people. And so we would absolutely encourage people who are interested in finding a real solution to the issues that you face in the workplace to think about different ways that you can stand up together. And please get in touch with us at the Labor Council. You can get in touch with the Employee Rights Center, with CPI, with Jill, with any of our partners, and we can start to have conversations about how we can fight for justice here collectively in San Diego. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Right now we're at our Q&A portion. If any of you have questions for the panelists, this is your opportunity to ask. You can please raise your hands. Anybody has questions?
What about, spend a lot of time with low-wage workers, what about women in the workplace who are in white-collar jobs? How do they eliminate their wage gap? They don't use it.
couple words and then, so one thing is that California just passed an Equal Pay Act, which is the strongest equal pay act in the country. The federal government passed legislation in the 1960s that says equal pay for equal work. But what California just passed says equal pay for substantially similar work. And it also says that you don't have to be in the same work site if it's owned by the same company. So we're actually seeing new legislation that might deal with one portion of the wage gap, which is women and men doing the same work and being paid differently. There's another very large portion of the wage gap that has to do with the fact that women and men often do substantially different work. And that's a whole process of socialization and education and getting women into different fields. But in the portion of the wage gap that is about discrimination, we are seeing some progress, although we are also seeing some backtracking. So we saw the largest class action lawsuit in the history of the United States with women coming together, thousands, tens of thousands of women. Does anybody have a number? That were suing Walmart for discrimination across the country at their stores, and the Supreme Court actually ruled that they couldn't bring that as a class action lawsuit. And that really undermines the ability of people to come together and says, well, you have to individually show that there was discrimination against you when there's a clear pattern of discrimination. So we're seeing both progress and backtracking. But would anybody like to add?
So the biggest thing that, and I've seen, I haven't been practicing law for that long, about 6 years, but about 3 on my own. And what I see is this, it all comes down to you as the individual. All of this stuff about passing laws, doing whatever, it's worthless if we're not enforcing it. And the only way that it gets enforced is when the person realizes that they're getting screwed and they're going to stand up for it. Now, here's what I've seen in my experience with my practice, right? Is that you have a professional woman who they're getting discriminated against because of pregnancy, they're getting sexually harassed, you name it, whatever it is. The thing that I hear, and this is what kills me, is that if I make a claim, if I file a lawsuit, my career is over. And what sucks is that they're right. They're right. Because every time they go somewhere to apply for a new job, to get a better job, to do whatever it is that they should be doing, it just hangs over them, right? Why is that? It's because there's some idea that when a woman speaks out, or when anybody speaks out, when a woman speaks out, that there's something wrong with that. And so how we change that is not just with enforcement, is that you yourselves realize that you have to speak out. Yes, collectively, but sometimes what it takes is the individual to stand up. You know, the more individuals that stand up, the more that you will becoming, it will be normal, and that this will be accepted. And mark my words, okay? You, especially women out there, you're gonna see it someday. You're gonna see it someday. It may not be now, it may be 5 years, it may be 10 years, but when it happens, recognize it, recognize that there's something wrong, and do something about it.
I just want to add that the California Equal Pay Act it's going into effect on January 1st, so we're going to see what difference this makes. Also has something that Rory was referring to. One thing that employers do to keep people exploited is to threaten that they cannot discuss their salary with anybody else. So a lot of employers have policies where you can't discuss your salary or reveal your salary to your coworkers. That is illegal under the California Equal Pay Act because it keeps women and minorities earning less because they aren't even able to compare their salaries. They don't realize they're making less. So that's another thing that you can take advantage of if your employer, you know, is telling people they're not allowed to share their wage information. That will be illegal starting January 1st.
Okay. Does anybody have a question?
I appreciate every one of your prayers, so thank you so much. It was very informative. Just a couple of things so that I don't have many of our students walk away kind of almost having contradictory ideas. I remember, I think, Calderon and Pendergast, you guys had mentioned that the minute you speak out, you're protected, right? And then now I hear you speak out and you're gonna like get fired and it sucks. So I just want to make sure that, I think many of us are actually really afraid, right? And that's the reality. And it is because we live in a sexist society, dominated by capitalism and so on and so forth. So in some ways, I do understand the fear that many of our students have. So in some ways, are there some strategies, so that, you're right, you're absolutely right. You need to have commitment, you need to have courage to do this, right? But it's a little bit more difficult, when we realize we're getting jobs that are very much, right, tenuous, and then when we speak up, we might be fired. So are there certain, kind of real type of strategies that you folks can offer, or examples that you could give?
So, is this working?
Yeah.
Where I think we're all on the same page is standing up individually or collectively, of course, takes tremendous courage, of course. And there's no way around the fact that when you stand up for yourself, you're often going to be putting yourself at risk because employers don't like it. People who have power don't like to see people standing up for themselves. However, what we always talk to workers about who, for instance, might be in a organizing drive to form a union in their workplace is what you want to do is you want to bring these issues to the light of day. You're more protected the more open you are. So, there are, legal, as an individual, there are legal issues that an employer faces if they retaliate because you're, standing up for your rights under the law. There's clear legal provisions that protect workers' rights to organize a union, and that prohibits the employer from retaliating against workers for the act of forming a union. So when workers get to a point in an organizing drive that they're ready to, go public, make it clear to the boss that we're asserting our rights to be recognized as a union and to bargain. You always have workers who are on the fence and they say, well, I support the idea of, being part of a union, but boy, I don't want to sign that card because what happens if the boss sees that I've signed the card? And the argument that we make is, if you want protection, sign the card. Because, an employer is going to come up with a lot of reasons to fire you. Employers are too smart, mostly, to say, you know what, we don't like the fact that you're part of forming a union, so we're going to fire you. And if you never sign that card, it's hard for you to make the case that, look, you're claiming all these things, but the reality is, I was part of, organizing a union and you fired me as a result. If you sign the card, if you're visible, if you are part of the, contingent that goes and delivers the petition to the boss, and then you get fired, it's much clearer, that we can make a case that it's retaliatory. So it seems contradictory, and I appreciate that. But the more you're out there in the open standing up for your rights and asserting your rights, the more protection you actually have.
The other thing is that oftentimes I'll have people come to me and they're talking about everything that's going on, and I have to say this. I say, hey, you speak up on your own and you're probably going to get fired, or there's a good chance of it. But really what I've seen is this, is that it depends upon, you can come to me, I can take a look at something, I can take a look at who the employer is, and then I've been doing this enough where I can get a gut feeling as to whether I think that they're dumb enough to fire you, or whether that they're going to try to help you out. Unfortunately, where I've seen, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to drum up business, but where you have an attorney sending a letter, people start to get scared. Because they know that, one, not only are you strong enough to stand up for yourself, but you have someone else, someone possibly like me, that gets up every single day, and all I do all day long is fight, right? You think you get tired of it. It can be a grueling business, but some of us just kind of like this. We just sit there and we fight, and we fight, and we fight, and we fight. And really, that sort of attitude is what you're going to be afraid of as an employer. So unfortunately, you're stuck with this, you're stuck in purgatory. If I continue on, I'm going to be taking advantage of it. If I speak up, I'm out. Really what it is, educate yourself. Know what the laws are, right? There's so much information out there. There's so many, everything out there. And then track everything that's going on. Keep a narrative. Keep, document all of this stuff. Forward emails to yourself. Print the emails off, whatever it may be. And then finally, when you're out to it, is not only just speak up through the grievance procedures, through whether it be a state agency or whatever it is, but have an attorney there to help you. Because the employer's going to know that here's the unfortunate thing. They think that, oh, yeah, you filed a complaint with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing or the EEOC, but you didn't get an attorney because no attorney wants your case because it sucks, right? And that's oftentimes is not the case. But on flip that, they say, oh, there's an attorney there. Maybe there is something here. So you're more likely going to have some luck there. I don't know what it is.
I would say not much more to it. Other than to say that there are many successful, examples of people that are on their own, mothers who are pregnantly being fired, and some of them get very nice payoffs. And on the side of, collective work, there are many examples. Somewhere I can talk to the Employer Rights Center where workers got together and they went to the labor council and they asked other people and said, who can support us? And everybody got to get back to work. And so, I know we're in a difficult situation sometimes, but there's a lot of successes we can also talk about. And I think what we're, at least from the Employer Rights Center point of view, I think I need to underline what Laura was saying and what Richard was saying is, there's a collective way of doing it, there is an individual way of doing it, and then you need to be educated and engaged to know what your options are at the right time so that you can decide that that option is for you, as opposed to wait till it happens, wait till there's no documentation, and now feel that it's too late.
I want to say one thing about courage. I don't know if can you all hear me? I think about what you're fighting for. Like, think about when you look at your paycheck and you know that you came in an hour early and you're actually only getting paid for those 6 hours or 4 hours or 2 hours, or you go home and you're sharing an apartment with 4 other people, and you're trying to put yourself through school, and you're trying to pay all these bills, and you think about for the people who are fighting to make change in their workplace, that is the thing that if that's worth it to you, then that will help everything. That will make the change, and that is going to be what's going to be worth it. Because if not, if you don't even try, then you're saying it's okay for that paycheck to look the way that it is. It's okay for someone to take my wages. It's okay for people to vote in my best interest, even though I would have voted differently, right? So I think think about if you think it's fair that that's happening, then just go ahead, go on your day. But if you think it's unfair, then I think we're saying take action and just think about why and if it's worth it. Because say you do take action and something does happen, or then you're basically saying you're okay with it, or if you don't stand up, then you're basically saying you're okay with the way things are. I think that if that to me is the important thing to remember. The second thing is the National Labor Relations Board. We haven't said it today, but if you take collective action, with or without a union, any kind, to improve your wages and working conditions, and you feel like you're being treated differently, or your coworkers who did that are being treated differently or discriminated against because of that, then you go to the National Labor Relations Board, the local office in San Diego, because that is a federal agency that oversees this. So you can just go to the office and they have drop-in hours, and you say you want to talk to somebody about filing a charge, and they have an intake person there, and you can talk to them about it. So that's another resource, another public resource. So whether it's private attorney, federal government, state agency, union, or other community allies that fight for these issues, there's a lot of resources in San Diego to support people.
Thank you, Estella and panelists. We have a couple of questions here. This question is for Mr. Barrera. How do unions bargain for wage increase and other benefits?
So I'll answer with the kind of the formal process, and then I'll talk about how it really happens. So let's say the example we were using, you got a workplace, you got 100 workers.